These cases began as an investigation into family child sex abuse. Law enforcement sought the DNA of Gary Ciders Jr. related to the child sex abuse case. Once Ciders Jr. was located, search warrants were executed to secure his DNA for genetic testing. Upon serving the search warrants for the child sex abuse case, the existence and condition of the 16 children at the Omer Street house became known. The child sex abuse cases involve intra-family relations and do not pose a risk to the general public, and I would also add, does not involve human trafficking. This case all started with diligent Dollar General clerks calling authorities with concerns over children they observed. We ask the public to be mindful of the circumstances around them, especially involving children. We continue to ask for the public's respect for the rights and privacy of the child victims in this case.
Information obtained in this investigation prompted BCI in March of 26 to open a second investigation, this one involving allegations of unlawful sexual conduct with a minor. There have been a lot of speculation and questions regarding the June 30th presence on Omer Street in Hamden. These indictments provide some insight into the ongoing investigation. However, to preserve the integrity of the ongoing investigation and to protect the victims, I conclude my statement here.
The Ohio Attorney General's pre-recorded statement runs just under 2 minutes. The language is careful, sanitized, designed to close the door on public speculation. These cases began as an investigation into family child sex abuse. Then comes the line that should make every listener stop cold. Law enforcement sought the DNA of Gary Ciders Jr. related to the child sex abuse case. That is the sentence. That is the hinge. The state confirmed that a search warrant for one man's genetic material is what led investigators to a house on Murr Street where 16 children were found living in a 12 by 12 room. Not a noise complaint, not a truancy report, not a concerned neighbor. DNA. That single biological marker became the key that opened a door investigators apparently did not know they needed to open.
It turns out there are actually 3 parallel investigations happening. Investigators started out investigating allegations of child abuse in December of last year. That led to charges against 2 men. And this is interesting. These men are names that we haven't really been focused on before. But the 2 men who were charged are Josh Saunders and Brandon Henderson. And then while investigating them, investigators began looking into Elizabeth and Gary Ciders. That's according to NBC4, and they say that Gary Ciders Jr. and Elizabeth Ciders have now both been indicted on 2 counts of sexual battery and 2 counts of unlawful conduct with a minor. We don't know who the victims of the sexual abuse are, which is pretty typical. Like it's, that kind of stuff remains secret, especially since they are minors, it seems. But officials said the victims were not the couple's children. According to NBC4, records show that Henderson, remember he's one of the new names, Brandon Henderson, one of the new guys who was arrested, that he is part of the larger Ciders family. Exactly what that means, I'm not sure. It's confusing. Authorities are being very, very tight-lipped. They're just giving out really the basics of this information.
Think of this case as a house with 2 separate foundations. The first foundation is what the public saw in June of 2026. 16 children, ages ranging from 18 months to 18 years, described by investigators as almost feral, living in filth. The second foundation is what existed under that house for months before anyone arrived with a warrant. A child sex abuse investigation. 2 men already charged. A search for DNA. And when authorities showed up to swab Gary Ciders Jr.'s cheek, they found a crime scene that had nothing to do with why they came. That is the visual you need to hold on to. The search warrant was not about the children in that room. The children in that room were incidental to a different investigation entirely. They were discovered by accident. And that accident now raises a question that should sit heavy over every new court filing. If investigators had never needed Gary Ciders Jr.'s DNA, would those 16 children still be in that room right now? Before we go deeper into what the documents actually show, make sure you're subscribed to Endless Cryme, because we don't just cover the story, we follow the evidence. The indictments against Gary Ciders Jr. and Elizabeth Ciders are narrow. 2 counts of sexual battery. 2 counts of unlawful sexual conduct with a minor. The legal definitions matter here. Sexual battery in Ohio means sexual conduct with another person when the offender knows the other person's ability to appraise the nature of the conduct is substantially impaired. Unlawful sexual conduct with a minor covers a range of offenses depending on the age differential. The state has not named the victims. It has not specified when the alleged abuse occurred. It has not connected these charges to the 16 children found in that room. In fact, the Ohio Attorney General went out of his way to state that the victims were not the couple's children. That is a critical distinction. The public hears child abuse and assumes as the worst possible scenario involving the children in that house. The state is saying, not those children. Someone else, somewhere else. And that opens up an entirely different map.
Something is going on. That's strange. And it's clear that law enforcement is wanting to not let the public know what's really happening. And what I found most interesting about this new information is, the first investigation began into this Joshua Saunders and Brandon Henderson, these two individuals, for rape, for sexual, deviance behavior. From that investigation came a search warrant trying to obtain Gary Ciders' DNA. Why I find that interesting, and then we know from that search warrant comes the discovery of all the kids who were living in these deplorable conditions. But
Right.
Going back to the fact that law enforcement is actually procuring a search warrant and serving it for Gary Ciders' DNA, that tells me that they expect that there is fresh evidence that will link Gary's DNA to a victim. So while all the tabloids, the information says it's from a 2022 investigation, there's only one of two ways why his DNA, in my opinion, as a sexual assault former prosecutor, would be relevant 4 years later in 2026. And that would be number one, because we have some type of bodily fluid, semen, something from a victim that we need to determine, does Gary Ciders' DNA match? Or there's a victim who has, sadly, I've seen obtain like a sexually transmitted disease, and they need to test Gary's DNA to see if he's positive for it, to see if the link is there that he gave it to her from sexually abusing.
Here is where the former prosecutor's analysis becomes essential. Kim Deonia prosecuted the Turpin case in California. That was the original house of horrors. 13 children. Chained to beds. Starved. Beaten. She has spent years dissecting how these family systems operate. Her read on the Ohio indictments cuts through the official fog. The state says the investigation began in December of 2025 with allegations against two men named Josh Saunders and Brandon Henderson. Those men were charged. Then, in the course of that investigation, authorities sought Gary Ciders Jr.'s DNA. Why would a DNA search warrant be issued months after the original investigation began? Deonia's answer is surgical, because investigators found something. Bodily fluid.
So you mentioned it. It was Josh Saunders and Brandon Henderson who were arrested and charged with child sexual abuse. And
Rape,
apparently,
essentially.
Brandon is somehow related to the Ciders, like distantly. I've heard. But what would then cause them, do you think, to have to go get DNA from Gary Ciders? I guess that's the part, and that's again why they blew open the whole lid about the kids living like that. But what would have caused them to go get his DNA based on those other two being investigated, do you think?
I mean, clearly they thought he was a suspect in some form, whether it was as a child predator, whether it was as an aider and abetter, whether it's as, a child sex ring, we don't know. But the fact that they're trying to obtain his DNA is very specific, and the DNA looks for very specific things, especially in sexual assault cases. We're looking for a match after we've done a rape kit, essentially. And so to me, that's what it tells us, that they went to look for his DNA, that he's somehow connected potentially to the rapes of Josh and Brandon, because that's how they're linked.
Which is so interesting because we didn't know until now why they went to the house. I mean, there were all sorts of theories, but now we know.
Right. And it was nothing related, right, as of yet that we're aware of, to the deplorable conditions of the kids.
Semen. A rape kit result. An STD transmission, something biological from a victim that required a comparison sample. you do not seek a search warrant for a person's DA 4 years after an alleged incident unless you have physical evidence sitting in a lab waiting to be matched. That is not speculation. That is procedure. And that procedure is what led investigators to the Mare Street house. The DNA search warrant was the tripwire.
So I was thinking about the Turpin case and some of the other cases that you've prosecuted and that you work on now with your firm. Do you think this is just the beginning? Like, could there be other, charges, other sexual assault claims that they're looking into involving other victims?
Oh, 100%. Not just other victims, but honestly, Brian, I wouldn't be surprised if we in the future see other charges added to the complaint for their very own kids with this type of behavior. Once you see, sadly, one count that somebody's a child predator, you often see other victims having the courage to come forward. And we also see routinely, disclosure of sexual assault is a process. It takes some survivors decades and decades to come forward. So these kids are just now being rescued from the conditions in which they were living in, having issues of not being able to be fed, things like that. And so the sexual assault disclosures, if it happened to them, is going to come much later, if ever, as well as any other potential victims.
The 16 children were the explosion. Now, consider the timeline. The Attorney General says the initial investigation started in December of 2025. The pre-recorded statement mentions that information attained prompted a second investigation in March of 2026. Then came the June 30th presence on Mare Street. That is a 7-month gap between the first allegations and the discovery of the children. 7 months in which Gary Ciders Jr. and Elizabeth Ciders remained in that house. 7 months in which investigators were building a case, but had not yet executed a search warrant for DNA. Deonia's phrase for this is blunt. Something is going on that's strange. And the strangeness is this: law enforcement had enough probable cause to seek genetic material from Gary Ciders Jr., but apparently did not have enough urgency to execute that warrant for months. While the case was being built, those children sat in that room. While investigators gathered evidence, those children remained isolated. The official narrative wants you to believe this was a diligent step-by-step process. But the timeline suggests something else. A process that moved slowly enough to allow an unrelated house of horrors to continue unchecked. That is the gap between what was said and what happened. And it is a gap that should trouble anyone watching this case unfold. The parallel to the Turpin case is unavoidable.
With the kids who were rescued from the house, and again, just with your experience with the Turpins, and some of these kids apparently couldn't even speak. Do you think we're at a point now where they're able to give prosecutors information, or is that going to take more time?
Oh no, I think it's going to take so much more time. And we had one of the experts explain to us very eloquently when we were interviewing and trying to understand the depths of the damage to the Turpin kids and how their brain developed or did not develop because of the conditions. And one of the experts explained to me that if you take a piece of Swiss cheese, there's holes all throughout it. And then if you take a piece of cheddar cheese, there's no holes. A normal child's brain is supposed to develop like that cheddar cheese, no holes in it. But the kids who are not receiving the communication, the normal societal things that they're supposed to be experiencing, are missing out on very significant markers in their age and their brain development, which is creating these holes like the Swiss cheese. And those holes likely will not be filled in. So while we hope that there's some type of therapy and socializing and, types of things we can do with these kids to fill in the holes, there's a good chance there's going to be permanent damage that they may not be able to disclose.
Both cases involve children found in conditions that defy belief. Both involve a mother who later claims victimization. Both involve a marriage that began when the mother was 15 years old. Elizabeth Ciders reportedly married Gary Ciders Jr. when she was 15 and he was 18. Louise Turpin married David Turpin under similar circumstances. In California, a 15-year-old having sex with an 18-year-old is statutory rape. The same power imbalance existed in both households. Deonia is careful not to declare Elizabeth Ciders guilty, but she is equally careful not to accept the victim narrative at face value. At some point, she explains, a person stops being a victim and becomes a co-conspirator.
Jalissa, again, I'm just blown away by her strength and how much she has grown and healed, and it's really just an inspiring story, especially because, as I mentioned earlier, she wasn't just abused by her parents, but she was re-abused in almost a worse way when she went into the foster care system in California, which again is one of the reasons she wanted to do this interview, because she wants to send a message to the authorities in Ohio, with these kids now in Ohio that were rescued, to make sure that they have good foster parents and non-abusive foster parents. What happened to her is, again, put in a foster home, re-abused. The foster parents were Marcelino Alguin and his wife Rosa. They ended up getting charged with child abuse. And again, just to think that Jalissa and her siblings were re-victimized. But I talked to her about that.
And so it is so important for everyone to like keep a close eye on these kids from Ohio and make sure that they are getting the care, or more so like keep a close eye on like the workers around and make sure that they're doing what they need to do, because it's easy to look away, but then when something bad happens and you can't undo that, and then that's going to be on you, like the worker, the social worker that decided to not listen to the kid when they said, my parents, I feel like they're going to be abusive because of this. I feel like they're this. And they say, the workers will say, oh, they just have PTSD, they have trauma, so they're just overanalyzing it. But then you're like choosing to risk that child, that vulnerable child, and choosing to like risk their health and their safety and their comfort, just so that way you don't have another thing to work on, or just so that way you can say, because there's a chance they could be lying. Like, why would you risk that for someone that's so vulnerable and someone that's already been through so much?
And they may not even be able to complain themselves or even know how to.
I know, exactly. Like, the only reason I ever like said anything to workers was because my siblings said stuff, or because like I talked with them, and I knew that like if they thought that this was odd. Like, I was 11 when I got out, and I wasn't really sure to know what was wrong or not, because I knew something felt wrong, but I was like, who am I to say it is wrong? And for these kids from Ohio, they I've heard that they can't really like speak and like, or even spell their name, and that means it's going to be even harder for them to like try to report things. And I think that's why it's so important. Like, we have an opportunity right now, right, to make sure that these kids can have a good healing journey. That it's obviously not going to be easy, but right now it is so important to make sure that we don't add any more trauma, and that we be careful with what like foster care system they're with, and all of their workers, their therapists, their foster homes. Like, every step is so important because of like how vulnerable they are.
The longer Elizabeth Ciders stayed in that situation, the harder it becomes to argue she lacked the intent to participate. The defense will likely claim mental health issues. The defense will likely argue she was groomed at 15 and never developed the capacity to resist. Deonia dismisses this. The Turpin defense tried the same strategy. It was shut down almost immediately. Juries and judges are not inclined to believe that someone who spent 18 years keeping children in filth lacked the mental capacity to understand what she was doing. The victim narrative works until you look at the scale of the harm.
I really, really appreciate Kim for taking the time to talk with me. She's just such a rock star, and as I said, she was the Turpin prosecutor. Remember the Turpin case, which was the original House of Horrors case in California. The Turpin children were beaten, strangled, starved by their parents, David and Louise Turpin. They were chained up. They were only allowed to bathe once a year. And it was just terrible. It was terrible. And you guys might remember within the last month, I interviewed one of the kids, one of the victims, Jalissa Turpin, and you're going to hear more from her in a second. It was her sister, Jordan, who was able to escape in 2018. She was able to call 911 from a deactivated cell phone, and that sort of broke that whole case open.
16 children, 16 separate human beings. The sheer number makes the claim of passive victimhood collapse under its own weight.
And you and I have talked about this before. I mean, her lawyer has sort of painted her out as a victim too in all of this. And you mentioned her mental health has come up. She's been trying to get a bond. Is it possible that she is also a victim, or do you think now that we see that she's been charged with this now also, it shows us even more that she's not a victim at all?
It's hard to say. There are some facts that point to the fact that Elizabeth could potentially be a victim herself in some capacity. It's interesting to me that there's reports that she married Gary Jr. when she was 15 years old and he was 18. Ironically, that was the exact same fact pattern we saw in the Turpin case. Louise was around the age of 15 and she married David when he was 18. There's a reason why 15-year-olds don't have the right to get married and bear children. They need their parents' consent or signature because they're not emotionally developed and ready to be married and start having children. And so could we see some mental health or some victimization from that alone? Absolutely. In California, if a 15-year-old is having sex with an 18-year-old, that's statutory rape. That right there is a crime in and of itself. And so we see that pattern oddly in the Turpin case as well as in this case. And then it begs the question, if she's getting married at the age of 15 to an 18-year-old, is there some type of mind control and emotional control going on with Gary over her? And that just kind of progresses over the years that leads us to where we are now. Sure, I think that's possible.
The moral refrain here is 3 words. He gave them the blueprint. Gary Ciders Jr. allegedly did not just abuse. He allegedly provided the pattern that others followed. The 2 men charged in the original investigation, Josh Saunders and Brandon Henderson, are reportedly connected to the larger Ciders family. Brandon Henderson is described in records as being part of the family structure. The exact relationship remains unclear. What is clear is that the initial child sex abuse investigation led to 2 men, and those 2 men led investigators to Gary Ciders Jr. That is not a coincidence. That is a network. He gave them the blueprint. The elder Gary Ciders, Sar, age 73, and Christina Ciders, age 66, were also arrested in connection with the conditions in the house. 4 adults, 1 property, multiple investigations, and at the center of it all, a search warrant for DNA from 1 man that uncovered a separate crime scene entirely. He gave them the blueprint. Now the question is, how many copies of that blueprint exist outside the Ciders family? The children found in that house are the silent variable in this entire case.
When you first came out into the real world, how do you, when you haven't really had any socialization skills, and I'm thinking of the Ohio kids, like how do you even begin to learn?
I honestly don't really know. It's kind of like, it's a little bit blurry, like my memory from things then, but I don't know. It was kind of hard to like adjust to the world, I feel like, or like socialize and stuff, but
Did you know that you could have a friend?
Like while I was in the house?
Yeah.
No. No. I don't know. I thought that people like having friends and like neighbors talking to each other and all that stuff, I thought that was like fake or just like stuff that's in the movies or something. I didn't know that like I could actually have a friend. I also didn't know that like school was even normal. I didn't know like where I would get a friend.
So you have to start really from nothing in terms of learning about all of that.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that people, it's easy to forget about that for most people because we've been born into, or most people have been born into a world where they know everything. Like having friends, like nobody thinks, oh, this person's not gonna know that friends are a thing. And like even with literally saying, how are you? That was odd to me that people would say, hi, how are you? It's like, why is everybody asking how I am? Like it was so weird because it's the most common phrase ever, but it was never used. I like don't remember a single time in that house I was ever asked like by like an adult or a parent, like, are you okay? Or how are you? Like it was just odd to me. And I thought it was just because it was my case that people were like, I guess concerned. But, and I heard people talking to like saying it to each other. So it was a little bit confusing, but, yeah, I feel like it's easy for people to forget like common things like that. Like it literally is like so hard to adjust. And like for these kids in Ohio, them coming out into this world when they've been isolated their whole life it's gonna be hard. Like as much as I wish I could be like, it won't be that hard, it'll be easy, that's not the case. It's gonna be really hard to adjust, but it's definitely possible, and it's definitely possible for them to get the healing and everything that they need. And I think that's why it's so important that we make sure their surroundings, the people around them, the workers, and like the schooling that you place them in, like don't put it in a school that's like known for being bad or something, you know, like the foster care system, like the workers you place them with, the house foster homes that you place them with, it is so important because right now this is basically their first, like, I don't know because I'm not them, but for me it literally felt like my first day on earth. And so whatever I got, that was normal to me. Like for me, when I got out, it was a little bit intimidating, but I was so happy. Like I was always on cloud 9 because it was like, honestly, just being able to see a tree, just being able to breathe in fresh air, that literally felt like heaven to me. And yeah, like no, I felt like it can't really get more scary or worse than being in that house.
They cannot speak.
Jalissa's just so amazing. It was really an honor to get to talk with her and share her story. And I'm just so happy that, you know, she's bought a house now and she's got good friends and she's still close with all of her siblings. So she's, you know, really overcome so much with everything she went through, and hopefully with these Ohio kids, they can do the same. So I'll stay on top of the Ohio case. I'm actually in Massachusetts right now. You guys know I've been covering the Lindsay Clancy trial, so I'm going to be covering that this week. And but I'll keep an eye on anything new. I think there's going to be a lot of this kept secret in Ohio, just because with child abuse cases and with underage victims, you know, they don't share very much, and a lot of this stuff is kept under seal. So there's maybe a while before we learn more, but it seems this is just the tip of the iceberg with the disturbing nature of this Ohio House of Horrors case. So
some reportedly cannot spell their own names. They have been isolated from birth, kept in a 12 by 12 room, denied basic socialization. The Turpin survivor interviewed in the reference material described not knowing that friends were real.
in Ohio, the mom through the courts is fighting to try to see her children.
Yeah.
You know, she wants to see them.
Yeah.
Says she loves them.
Sorry. I okay. Sorry.
No, it's okay. But what do you think of that?
I think that is really dumb. And I do not think, I've seen people saying, oh, she's the victim or whatever. Okay, if she can be a victim, but that does not give her any slack whatsoever. I believe my mom was a victim, but that does not give her any, any excuse to do what she did to her kids, you know? And I think that obviously they're gonna want to say, this happens a lot. When a parent does something that's very bad and they get caught for doing something very bad to their children, they say, oh, I want to see my child, I want to see them or whatever. It could just be because they want control. It could be because they want to intimidate the child and be like, oh, you can't escape me, or I'm still here, or anything like that. Or it could be just to help their case to make them look innocent, because I'm pretty sure the parents pleaded, said that they weren't guilty. And right, so it would, I guess, they might think it look better for their case if they're saying, I want to see my children, I care about them. But that's not, I do not believe in any way whatsoever that is true, or that is what the kids need. And I think that if that was to happen, that would just do more harm to the kids. I don't think that the parents have any right to say, oh, I care about my child and I miss them and I want to see them, when you were putting them through abuse and torture for so many years.
She thought having friends was something that only happened in movies. She did not know that school was normal. She had never been asked, "How are you?" by an adult in her entire childhood. The Ohio children faced the same void. But unlike the Turpin children, they were discovered not because one of them escaped, but because a DNA search warrant for an unrelated sex abuse case happened to be served at their address. That raises the ticking clock question. If the initial two men had never been investigated, if Gary Ciders Jr.'s DNA had never been requested, if the search warrant had been served 1 week later or 1 month later, would those children still be in that room right now? The answer is almost certainly yes. And that means the discovery of the 16 children was never the goal of the investigation. It was a byproduct. A tragic accident of procedure. The real target was Gary Ciders Jr.'s genetic material. The children were collateral.
Why do you think Elizabeth Ciders would have also been indicted on 2 counts of sexual battery? I mean, what do you think that could mean?
I mean, I have seen this in my career, and it's horrible that she was working alongside him. You know, I've seen a couple cases in my career where the husband and the wife worked together to sexually assault the children. Oftentimes I've seen the mother help hold down the child while the father could perform the sexual assault. I've seen the mother kind of acquiesce and let her children be abused for money from other men, let them take photos. It's not uncommon to see the mom who's in a relationship with a man like this participating passively for many different reasons, right? We see her mental health issues that they're claiming, but it's not uncommon, sadly. I have seen this before in my career.
The sealed nature of the case adds another layer.
How do you think this will turn out, especially with her trying to say she's a victim? I mean, and just overall, do you think there'll be with the Turpin case, there was a plea deal. What do you think will happen next year?
Yeah, the Turpin case, there was a plea deal, and that mental health diversion defense that Louise tried was not successful at all. It was shut down almost as quickly as they raised it. It did not play a part at all in the sentencing. Do I think it's going to be successful? Not likely. And this is why. Because Elizabeth has been living in these conditions with these children and allowing them to be treated this way for so many years. It's really hard for any jury or any prosecutor or any judge or any mental health professional, I would think, to opine that this is an ongoing victimization and that at some point she wasn't able to get out from underneath this situation. At some point, she became an aider and abetter, a co-conspirator right along with Gary. So to me, the longer that she stays in that situation, I just don't know that anyone is going to believe that at some point she couldn't have gotten out. We're not seeing any signs of her having psychosis or, hearing voices, hallucinations, things that would suggest that her mental health was so compromised for so long that would warrant her keeping these children in this situation for 18 years. And so I don't foresee it being successful.
Because the sex abuse allegations involve minors, the records will remain heavily redacted for years. The state will release information in fragments. Each indictment will be parsed. Each motion will be analyzed, but the full picture will not emerge until trial, if there is a trial. Deonia predicts that the initial charges are just the beginning. Victims often take years to come forward. The 16 children in that house may not be able to disclose anything for months or years, if ever. The brain damage from prolonged isolation and sensory deprivation is permanent in many cases.
Yeah, I just wonder with this situation in Ohio, if this is just the tip of the iceberg, if there's more to come.
I certainly think it is. And the years that I've been doing this, I think this is absolutely the tip of the iceberg. And we're going to probably see more of what is going on and the links between this Josh Saunders and Brandon Henderson case with Gary Ciders, the DNA, and even these new, sexual assault charges against Elizabeth and Gary. I think we're going to see the development of that.
The Turpin expert described it as the difference between cheddar cheese and Swiss cheese. A normal child's brain develops like cheddar, solid and dense. A deprived child's brain develops like Swiss, full of holes that will never be filled. Those holes are where evidence gets lost. Those holes are where testimony collapses. The Ohio children may hold the most important information in this case, but they may never be able to communicate it. That is the cruelest part of this entire story. The victims who know the most are the least equipped to speak.
With the Ohio kids, do you think it's important that they're kept together?
I think so. Definitely. Because oh my goodness, like if I was to go in foster care by myself, I would have never reported anything. I would still be in that house right now probably. And if I would have, I honestly don't even want to think about it. Like, it would be a nightmare if I had to go to school without my sister, if I had to go into a complete stranger's house being told that they're going to be your parents, when all you know about parents is that they've tortured you. Like those kids from Ohio, they were literally like tortured. Like if they were to be put in place in a foster home with another parent that that could possibly do something bad to them again, and that's going to be really bad if they have to go through that alone. I think it's because they don't know anyone from this world. They don't even know this world. And the only thing they know are their siblings. And that's very, very important. Having like my siblings definitely like helped me through getting out so much. Definitely was.
So what is the next step? The court documents are public record. The indictments are filed in Vinton County, Ohio. The pre-recorded statements from the Ohio Attorney General and the local sheriff are available on official government channels. If you want to understand this case, do not rely on second-hand summaries. Go to the source. Pull the indictment. Read the exact language of each count. Count the dates. Map the timeline. Then ask yourself one question. How long did investigators know about Gary Ciders Jr. before they served that DNA search warrant? Because the answer to that question determines whether the 16 children on Murr Street were rescued in time or rescued too late. And that is a question the official statements do not answer. The Attorney General concluded his remarks by saying he would preserve the integrity of the ongoing investigation. Translation: we will tell you nothing else, so the burden shifts, the document is there, the timeline is there, the gap is there, you just have to look. If this breakdown of the Ohio House of Horrors indictments helped you see the case from the evidence side, not the headline side, make sure you like this video, share it with anyone following the case, subscribe to Endless Crime, and turn on notifications. We do not speculate, we do not sensationalize, we follow the paper trail. And the paper trail here is not finished.